Chapter 3 is about the agile software development. In this chapter, the following topics are covered: agile methods, agile development techniques, agile project management, and scaling agile methods. But in this video tutorial, we will discuss about the agile methods and agile development techniques. Before coming to agile software development, first we see what is rapid software development. Rapid development and delivery is now often the most important requirement for software systems. As the name shows, rapid development and delivery means here the development will be quick and the delivery and deployment will be quick. The process will be quick. So business operate in the fast changing requirement, and it is practically impossible to produce a set of stable software requirement. So nowadays it is not possible that we have a set of stable requirement in the start of defining or specifying the requirement list. So the requirement change over the time due to the abrupt changes in the technology, or due to the changing demands or user needs. Software has to evolve quickly to reflect changing business needs. If we see, there are two categories of development approaches: the plan-driven development and agile development methods. Plan-driven development is essential for some types of system but does not meet these business needs. Agile development methods emerged in the late 1990s, whose aim was to radically reduce the delivery time for working software systems by accommodating the changes in the requirements from the stakeholder request in the software. So due to the evaluation of business, technology change, or customer needs change over time, so agile development accommodate these changes and assure the quick delivery. Agile development program specification, design, implementation are interleaved. The system is developed as a series of versions or increments, with the stakeholder involved in version specification and evaluation. This means in Agile we will develop the system in increments, and we will assure the frequent delivery of different versions of the evaluation. Extensive Agile development is extensive. Tool support, for example, automatic testing tools are available used to support the agile development. Minimal documentation, focus on working code. So agile development focus less on the documentation process. So these are the two approaches given. The first is the plan based development, and the second is the agile development. Here you can see, after the requirements collection or requirement gathering, we specify the requirements, or we can say we make a specification document, and then we go to the design and implementation phase. So but here in agile development, soon after the requirement engineering phase, we go to the design and implementation phase and escape the specification phase. The main reason is that in plan-driven approach, the requirements are mostly stable, and the requirements list is finalized. Specification document is finalized at the start of the software development during the planning phase, after the planning phase, and less chance of changes are expected in this specification document over the time. So thus we assure a documentation process in plan based approaches, but in Agile the requirement change over the time. So the original specification document that are designed in the start of the project does not remain the same and change over the time, so that is useless. And another reason is that documentation phase take quite time. So if you do design a specification document and then we change it over the time, so it will definitely take a time and definitely cost will be consumed by it. So due to these reasons the documentation phase is escaped from here, which is useless. So plan driven development approach to software engineering is based around separate development stages with the output to be produced at each of these stages planned in advance. Iteration occurs within these activities. In Agile development, specification, design, implementation and testing are interleaved, and the output from the development process are decided through the process of negotiation during the software development process. So this means we must have to rely on the effective negotiation, continuous negotiation with the customers and different stakeholders involved. So the different phases like designing, requirement correction, testing are interleaved. This means all the things goes in parallel, rather than we first like in plan driven approaches we first collect requirement, then design, and then development, testing, deployment. No, here along with the requirements collection we finalize the designing, we finalize the test cases, and then we implement the different versions, and then get the user feedback. Now come to discuss the different agile methods. Dissatisfaction with the overheads involved in the software design methods in duration of 1980s and 90s led to the creation of agile methods. These methods focus on the code rather than the designing. This does not mean that we will not finalize the design, but let's focus on the design. The reason is that due to abrupt changes, the design will also change. So if we focus more on the design, so laterally then the changes will become difficult to accommodate. So we will keep the design simple as much as possible. So the agile mostly focus on the code. Agile methods are based on an iterative approach to software development. What does iterative process means? That the functionalities will be changes over the time. So we will develop the software in increments as well as in iteration. In increment mean first version, second version, third version. Inside a particular version we will distribute the different tasks, such as task 1, task 2, task 3. We will first deploy task 1, task, and then then we will design and implement task 2, and then task 3, etc. So in each step the development and delivery is in increments, and inside each increment there will be iteration of the process. The aim of agile method is to reduce overheads in the software process, for example by limiting documentation. So this, as I stated earlier, that less rely on the documentation in agile, and to be able to respond quickly to the changes requirements without excessive rework. Agile manifesto. Now come to discuss the agile manifesto in detail. What is agile manifesto? We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work we come to value individual interactions over the process and tools, working software over the comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over the contract negotiation, responding to change over the following a plan. That is, while there is a value in the items to the product, we will the item on the left more. So these are the principles of agile methods. This means we must have to assure the following principles of agile method. The first principle is customer involvement. Customer should be closely involved throughout the development process. Their role is provided and prioritize new system requirement and to evaluate the iteration of this system. This means the customer must become the part of the team, and regular negotiations will be conducted with the customers, because the end product is for the customer. And if we say about changes come from the customer, so the customer involvement is very much beneficial here. And one thing more, we should rely more on effective communication, frequent discussion and negotiation with the customer. So that already comes with when customer are involved more and more. Incremental delivery, that is the second principle. The software is developed in increments with the customer specifying the requirements to be included in each increment. So that will be decided by the customer, which requirements, which functionality should be included and which should be not included in the particular increment, and that can be finalized using requirements prioritization. So different prioritization techniques are available, and we then based on the stakeholder need or desire towards some functionality, we prioritize the features or functional requirements of the, and then we map those functional requirements to different versions, or we can say increments. People, not process. So this means the skills of the development team should be recognized and exploited. This means agile rely on this experience or skill of the development team. The team members should be left to develop their own ways of working without prescriptive process. Embrace changes. This means welcome changes. This means when you claim to follow the agile method, you must have to welcome the changes, the new changes, or we can say if you customer want to change the existing feature. So this means you must have to welcome, expect the system requirement to change, and so design the system to accommodate these changes. And this reflects that the design should be kept simple as much as possible. The code structure of the design should be designed in such a way that it should easily accommodate the changes. Maintain the simplicity. It means simplicity in the designing, simplicity in the code structure. So focus on simplicity in both the software being developed and in the development process. Wherever possible, actively work to eliminate complexity from the system. Agile method applicability. Product development, where the software company is developing a small or medium size for a sale. This means the better option is to use it for small to medium size product, where the requirement size are not too much. We can say the requirements size not huge or too much. So the reason is that if the requirement size is huge or software are large, so then changes the code structure become difficult. Testing, integration testing, unit test become difficult, or changes in the code structure can affect other functionalities, or we can say the code structure changes can negatively affect the other functionalities, and this increase in when the number of requirement increase. So the better option is to apply it for small to medium size requirement. Virtually all software products and applications are developed using an agile approach. Custom system development with an organization where there is a clear commitment from the customer to become involved in the development process, and where there are few external rules and regulations that affect the software. Now come to discuss in detail agile development techniques. Different techniques are suggested, available in the literature. So now the first is extreme programming. We normally listen this word extreme programming. So now I will brief you about the extreme programming, a very influential agile method developed in the late 90s that introduced a range of development techniques. Extreme programming takes an extreme approach to iterative development. New version may be built several times per day. So that is the concept, basic concept of agile, that new version may be built several times, few times per day. Increments are delivered to customer every 2 weeks. This means the minimum duration should be around 10 days, 12 days, and maximum duration should be nearly to the 2 weeks or 14-15 days. So the increments, or we can say the requirement, should be mapped to different version or increments in such a way that it take hardly the 2 weeks. So all the tests must be run for every build, and the build is only accepted if test run successfully. So this means along with the designing and implementation, we should design the test cases and should run those test cases, and if it runs successfully, this means the increment is implemented successfully. Then laterally the customer feedback will come, and laterally we should accommodate the changes if requests come from the users. So the extreme programming release cycle, that is the release cycle, evaluate system. If the system or different versions or some version exist, or then select user stories for this release. The user will explain the functionality, user will explain the existing system. Then you must have to break down these stories into tasks, and then plan the release. This means the plan should be according to 2 weeks, and then you design, implement, test, and then you release that increment. Develop, integrate, test software, and then you release. So before release or before 2 weeks duration, you must have to make a plan of this release, and then based on that you will execute that plan, and then you develop, integrate, and test the software, and then you release the software. Then after the customer feedback or feature evaluation or release evaluation, then you again come to the story, you get stories, and then convert it to tasks, and again this cycle goes on. But remember one thing, that the design should be simple, the approach should be simple, less focus on documentation and less rely on the design tactics, etc. Extreme programming practices, these are the few principles or practices. The first is incremental planning. The planning before your release or before development should be incremental planning. That means requirements are recorded on story cards, and the stories to be included in the release are determined by the time available and their relative priority. The developers break these stories into development tasks. This means the stories, after negotiation with the clients, customers, after discussion with the clients, after communicating on different features, the different stories will come, and you must have to map these stories into tasks. This means, and the task minimum duration should be nearly about 10 to 14 days. So small releases focus more on the small releases. The minimal useful set of functionality that provide business value is developed first. So this means, as I stated earlier, based on the prioritization policy, you should release those requirements first, or tasks first that get more that are more beneficial for the business of clients. Releases of the system are frequent and incrementally add functionality to the first release. Simple designing, enough designing is carried out to meet the current requirements and no more. This means design tactics, code structure should be simple, so that one more thing I should explain you, that as there is no documentation, no specification documentation, no rely on specification documentation, so if over the time, if the changes come and the existing developer are no more in that company, and some new developers are assigned the task to carry on, so how they will know about the existing system? So that become challenge, because the SRS document does not exist. So one thing that count is skill that I earlier stated. Another thing is from studying or evaluating the existing design. So the design, that's why the design should be simple as much as possible, so that it become easier for the new upcoming developers to carry that thing. Test first development, an automated unit test framework is used to write test for the new piece of functionality before that functionality itself is implemented. Automation, why it focus more on automation? Because sometimes it takes more time on the testing rather than the development, or we can say the development time is less than testing time, or in other words we can also say that then there can be huge number of test cases, so manual testing can become too much time consuming. And one thing more, that the number of unit test cases are huge, so test first development, automated test unit test approach is better. And refactoring, that is also called code refactoring. All developers are expected to refactor the code continuously as soon as possible. Code improvements are found. This means the code should be improved, should be simple. This keeps the code simple and maintainable. Like for example, if we design the class, so the better option to improve that code is that we make subclasses of that class, or some sub functions of the particular functions, and so, or we rename the variable, rename the classes, so that it become easier for the developer to understand. Pair programming, that is another principle or practice of extreme programming. Developer work in pairs, checking each other's work and providing the support to always do a good job. Collective ownership, the pairs of developer work on all areas of the system, so that no island of the expertise develop, and all the developers take responsibility for all of the code. Anyone can change anytime. Continuous integration, this means as we are developing software in increments, and increments are interrelated, so this means we must have to integrate those versions together, or we can say there must be continuous integration. As soon as the work on the task is complete, it is integrated into the whole system. After any such integration, all the unit tests in the system must pass. So continuous integration is there, and integration is through code, so unit test should be performed and then integration test definitely. Sustainable phase, large amount of overtime are not considered acceptable, as the net effect is often to reduce the code quality and medium-term productivity. On-site customer, a representative of the end user of the system, should be available full-time for the use of extreme programming team. In an extreme programming process, the customer is a member of development team and is responsible for bringing system requirements to the team for implementation. This means you have to include the customer. So this is the summary I earlier stated. Extreme programming has a technical focus and is not easy to integrate with the management practice in most organizations. Influential extreme practices include these. Consequently, while agile development use practices From the extreme programming, the method as originally defined is not widely used. Key practices mean user stories, refactoring, test development, pair programming, and so on. User stories means in extreme programming, a customer or user is a part of extreme programming team and is responsible for making decisions. User requirements are expressed as a user stories or scenarios. We can also call user stories as a scenarios. Scenarios may originate from the existing system or come from the system, or we can say that these scenarios come in the developer mind, can be negotiated with the developers. These are written on cards, or we can say noted in somewhere in a database, and the development team break them into implementation tasks, smaller tasks. These tasks are the best of schedule and cost estimate. The customer choose the stories for inclusion in the next release based on their priorities and the schedule estimate. This is the example, a prescribing medication story. Prescribing medication story, this is the whole story. The record of the patient must be open for input. Click on medication field. So this is a long story, and then converting into task, it become like this. These are the story cards, store cards. Task 1, change dose of prescribed drug. Task 2, formulary selection. Task 3 is dose checking. One thing you should remember, that task should be designed in such a way, task should be designed from the user story or scenario in such a way that it can be independently implemented, designed and implemented, and then through continuous integration we will then integrate different tasks together as a one system. Refactoring, conventional wisdom in the software engineering is to design for change. It is worth spending time and effort anticipating changes, as this reduces cost later in the life cycle. Extreme programming, however, maintain that this is not worthwhile, as changes cannot be reliably anticipated. Rather, it proposes constant code improvement to make changes easier when they have to be implemented. Refactoring means programming team look for the possible software improvements through code and make these improvements even where there is no immediate need for them. So this means if there is no immediate need, still you have to improve that thing, code. This improves the understandability of the software and so reduce the need for the documentation. Changes are easier to make because the code is well structured and clear. If it is already well structured and clear, so changes will be easier. However, some changes require architecture refactoring, and this is much more expensive because architecture involves different patterns, different styles, modularity structure, and through that architecture change become difficult. So one thing you should also remember that refactoring should be you should refactor the code from the scratch, from the earlier, because laterally when you work too much, or you already for example have deploy different version, then laterally in the development phases refactoring become complex. So the better is to plan in advance. Example of refactoring: reorganization of class hierarchy to remove duplicate code, tidying up and renaming variable, replacement of inline code with calls to methods, make subclasses or subfunction for easy management and ensure usability. These are few examples. Test first development. Testing is central to extreme programming, and extreme programming has developed an approach where the program is tested after every change has been made. This means you must have to test that version or increment after bringing changes. Extreme programming testing feature: test first development, incremental test development from scenario, user involvement, automatic test increases. And that is about the test development. Customer involvement: So the role of customer in testing process is to help develop acceptable test for the stories that are to be implemented in the next release of the system. The customer, who is the part of the team, writes test as development proceeds. All new code is therefore validated to ensure that it is, and validation process is useless in Agile if you don't include the customer. So validation is normally in front of customers. However, people adopting the customer role have limited time available and so cannot work full time with the development team. They may feel that providing the requirement was enough of the contribution and so may be reluctant to get involved in the testing process. Test case description. This is the example of test description. For example, test 4 is on dose checking. So we will get input, test, and desired output, expected output, and then real output. Test automation means that tests are written as executable component before task is implemented. As task is automated, this means there is always a set of tests that can be quickly and easily executed. Now, problems with the test first development. There are some problems. Programmers prefer programming to test, and sometimes they take shortcuts when writing test. So programmers take shortcuts. For example, they may write incomplete test that do not check for all the development exception they may occur. Some tests can be very difficult to write incrementally. For example, in complex user interface, it is often difficult to write unit test for the code that implements the logic, display logic, and workflow between the screens. It is difficult to judge the completeness of set of tests. Although you may have a lot of system tests, your test set may not provide the complete coverage, so that becomes the difficulty. Pair programming involves programmers working in the pairs, developing code together. This helps develop common ownership. So through pair programming, common ownership become possible and spread knowledge across the team. It serves as an informal review process as each line of the code is looked at by more than one person. It encourages refactoring as the whole team can benefit for improving the code system. So through pair programming, the one more advantage we get from pair programming is the discussion among the team members or pair programmers. So if the different programmers come and discuss, so there is a chance of improvement always. In pair programming, programmers sit together at the same computer to develop the software. Pairs are created dynamically so that all the team members work with each other during the development process. The sharing of knowledge that happens during pair programming is very important as it reduces the overall risk to the project when team members leave. Pair programming is not necessarily inefficient, and there is some evidence that suggests that a pair working together is more efficient than two programmers working separately. So if they are working separately, as in traditional programming approach, so different thoughts come in their minds, so different approaches come in their minds, and when two pair sit together, so they negotiate their thoughts, or if there is some sort of conflicts on some requirements, so they negotiate, and through negotiation and conflicts can be resolved, and there is always a chance of better improvement through negotiation. So that was all about Agile development in detail. In next lecture we will talk more about the Agile. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.